Hi, my name is Sandy Baird, and I'm here in Burlington, Vermont. We're presenting a program tonight on the recent summit and the establishment of this alternate model of both economy and with great political implication called BRICS. And I'm here endorsed by VICII, or the Vermont Institute of Community and International Involvement, which has in turn sponsored a new organization called the Voice of Vermont, which is directed by my colleague Eric Agnero, who I will turn this over to introduce our guest speakers and to say that we are happily joined by two people who are around the African continent this afternoon. I guess not Gnaka, but we are joined by a guest from South Africa. So I'm turning this over to Eric Agnero, the producer of this program, to talk about BRICS, or the organization of new countries which have coalesced to form a new economic model and perhaps a new political model for the world. Eric, so
thank
go
you,
on.
Sandy. Thank you to our listeners that are now, and viewers that are now, joining us from West Africa, from Europe.
Yes.
It's a very, very interesting news. We're here also to talk about the BRICS summit, and then joining us from South Africa, Johannesburg, the BRICS Alliance representative in this country. He's a business consultant and a political analyst. It's Ohoupa Sessegnon. And we are joined from Washington, D.C., I believe, by Dr. Gnaka Lagoke, who's a Pan-Africanist political analyst as well and author. So before we get into our program, I would like to propose a video that will give us a little bit of context about the summit and about the BRICS, and then we'll come back for a discussion.
Great.
Here's the G7, a group of 7 of the world's advanced economies, including the US, UK, and Japan. And here's what some call the alternative from the developing world, the BRICS, formed by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The BRICS is trying to position itself as the voice for emerging economies and challenge Western dominance of global affairs. Its leaders are holding a summit in Johannesburg to discuss an historic expansion. More than 40 countries, including Saudi Arabia and Iran, want to join.
The expansion of BRICS could definitely boost the group's global influence.
Let's look at what a potential enlargement means for the alliance and its ambitions to shake up the global political and economic order.
The original term BRIC was actually coined by a Goldman Sachs banker, grouping these really different countries together because they were so fast growing.
The leaders of Brazil, Russia, India, and China formalized their relationship in 2009 and invited South Africa to join the alliance a year later.
They decided to take that idea in an effort to create a bit of a political and economic counterpoint to what's perceived as the Western hegemony of the global political and economic spheres.
The BRICS countries together make up more than 40% of the world's population and almost a third of the world's GDP. According to data from the International Monetary Fund, the bloc has already overtaken the G7 nations' share of the global economy on the basis of purchasing power parity. That's when the purchasing power of different currencies is equalized. Projections by Goldman Sachs show the world's economic balance shifting towards the BRICS and emerging economies. China is expected to overtake the US as the world's largest economy by 2050, with India climbing to number 3.
China and India have experienced massive growth since the BRICS were founded in 2009 and certainly have helped them swell in importance and remain relevant on the global stage.
China and Russia are pushing to enlarge BRICS. Experts say Beijing is keen to create an alternative grouping to counter the US and the West on the world stage.
China has been bullish on expanding BRICS for some time, and they're particularly keen at the moment because of the trade tensions with the US looking to diversify its supply chains away from China.
Russia sees an expansion as a way to gain more international allies following its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. South Africa publicly supports the expansion, as does Brazil, But experts say behind the scenes, Brazil and India want a more measured approach.
It seems that they are concerned about the group leaning too autocratic, so they want to have very specific requirements for admission to make sure that there's a balance amongst the members and that it doesn't become sort of the autocratic G7.
More than 20 countries have formally applied to become part of BRICS, ranging from Saudi Arabia to Ethiopia, Argentina, and Indonesia. Experts say Saudi Arabia is a strong candidate as a major economic and energy power in the Middle East with a growing role in regional diplomacy. Indonesia, with the world's fourth largest population, is another strong contender.
Indonesia, being such a large economy and important in the electrification, clean energy tech, electric vehicles, might be a logical choice.
One reason for joining the BRICS is gaining access to the bloc's new development bank. Since its founding in 2014, the bank has approved more than $30 billion in loans for development and infrastructure projects.
Access to funding from this bank, which seem to be having more favorable terms than a traditional development bank like the World Bank or the IMF, is definitely something that's attractive to a lot of countries.
The new development bank also wants to deepen the use of local currencies instead of the US dollar for trade and financing between the BRICS nations. Ultimately, experts say one of the biggest challenges for the BRICS to counter the West is to form a united voice on major global issues.
Generally, the countries have pretty diverse and diverging interests in politics, on security issues, even relations with the US. I think the group would like to be seen as an alternative political forum to the G7 group of developed nations. Whether or not it is able to achieve that, I think will largely depend on what countries it admits.
Thank you all, and then we are back on the set, Sandy, to open the discussion. Shall we start with what happened in South Africa?
I think for me and for our viewers who apparently know nothing about BRICS in this country, I think it'd be nice to explain what is BRICS again and what are the implications of it. And maybe you could have one of our guests
to
talk about that.
To Sessegnon in South Africa.
South
Ohoupa
Africa is in the BRICS.
in the BRICS, so it's
Right.
interesting. I mean, it's good that we have someone who's joining us from South Africa. Sessegnon, could you, explain what is BRICS to our audience and tell us about that summit which happened in South Africa recently?
Well, thank you for the thank you for the invitation to the program. Well, I think the video has said quite a mouthful about the BRICS, the organization. Well, this is an acronym of 5 countries, which are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These countries have come together to form an alternative to what we would call the West hegemony, the supremacy that we've been through. So these countries have decided to come together and see how they could really, tap into the real, development of Africa and of these emerging economies that form this organization. So about few days ago, the 15th summit took place here in Johannesburg, and most of all these countries, member countries, gathered here in Sandton in South Africa for further discussion. And we've seen that during this summit, the organization grew more roots, in the sense that we noticed the expansion of the organization, which invited 6 more countries.
Which are,
And during that summit,
these countries are the new countries.
well, countries that were invited are Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, United Arab Emirates, and
Saudi Arabia.
Saudi
Saudi
Arabia,
Arabia.
yeah.
Yeah, Saudi
Yeah.
and
And
So these are
Argentina.
Argentina. So these are the 6 countries that are, that have been accepted into the organization, and their membership will be effective from the 1st of January 2024. So that's basically what the organization has been dealt with, and this is surely what we're going to talk about during this conversation.
Okay, I heard that other countries knocked at the door, but just these 6 countries were admitted. What was the reason for that? Not like.
Well, it's a process. It's a process. I think it's normal that not everyone should be just admitted at once. There is a process, even though we don't know what exactly defines the eligibility of each country. That remains in the confidence of the member countries. But it's true, and I think it's a good thing that all these countries are knocking at the door, because this is a true alternative. The BRICS represents a true alternative for African countries to really look at their real development. So if these countries are knocking, I think it's a good sign that the idea of the forming of BRICS is really important and interesting for many other countries, because they see in this organization a future, the end of the hegemony that we have observed from the Western powers. So yes, many countries are knocking, but the process is on, and maybe during the next summit in a year to come, many other African countries mainly will be invited and accepted into the organization.
All right. You talked about Africa. I would like to bring in Dr. Gnaka Lagoke. What is the significance of that summit in Africa in a year that was marked by the war in Ukraine, but also, where Africa has been literally, asked to choose a side? Dr. Gnaka Lagoke, what is the significance of this summit happening in Africa?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here with Eric Agnero, and then Sandy and Robin, and the CCTV crew, and also with my good friend, Sessegnon, who is a man of integrity, a militant, somebody who believes in Africa. So we've been sharing many things. So I was happily surprised that he is here on the show, and then we are going to have a good conversation. I'm glad that you guys invited him so that he can talk from all the way from South Africa. This summit was very important for Africa because the first thing, Africa wants to have a voice, and then the fact that the summit took place in South Africa, which was, before now, the only African country to be a member of the BRICS, or one of the founding members, if I can say that, even if South Africa joined the BRIC later on. It's very important in the context of the Russian-Ukrainian war to see Africa taking the lead when the BRICS was about, to open its doors to other members. It's very important strategically, geopolitically, and that's something that we need to acknowledge. In the history books, this will be remembered as a very important moment, a milestone or a turning point in the history of Africa and its presence in global affairs. That is the first thing. The second thing is that beside South Africa, we have 2 very important power countries in Africa, Egypt and Ethiopia. Great history of those 2 countries that are joining the BRICS. We know the ancient Egyptian civilization even if today Egypt is led, by the descendants of Arabs who came to Africa in the 7th century. And then we have Ethiopia, which is, the heir or the descendant of that great Nubian civilization from Napata, Tat City, Kerma, Kush, and Abyssinia. And today we have Ethiopia also playing that great role. When we know the role that Ethiopia played in the history of Pan-Africanism, to see Ethiopia be one of the 2 first African countries to join South Africa, the BRICS, is a very important element. It's like great history, great memory, and also bright future that we hope to see with the enlargement of the BRICS nation.
But
The
they are
third
necessary.
element,
Yeah, they are probably also economic powers and
Right.
military powers.
Right.
Ethiopia is like military power and
Military, but also economic.
economic,
Right.
and Egypt.
No.
So
yeah, I understand. Algeria would have been there, but Algeria is not there. So I just wanted to talk about those elements, and then of course, Ethiopia was one of the fast-growing economies in Africa in recent years before the civil war led by the Tigray, and then Abiy Ahmed even won the Nobel Prize. Yes, Ethiopia is a very important powerhouse. They're doing some development, some infrastructural development over there. That one was built by the Chinese, like a railroad between Djibouti and Ethiopia. It's a very important element. And also because of Egypt, very important history, also a great power, economic power, even though Egypt is hurting seriously, severely nowadays, today. But we can see the positive side. So
all right.
if I can continue, or if there is another question.
Yeah, we'll go. Sandy.
Well, it's my understanding that very few people in the United States understands what's going on with BRICS or the implications. I wonder if both of you could comment on the implications for the West, if you want to call Western hegemony, which is the word that you used. What are the implications of this new economic and, I think, political power for the dollar, for the West, for the United States, and for Western Europe? What are the implications, and why is it so little understood here?
But also, what is it so frightening?
Yeah,
so
right,
maybe we could
right.
start with like the political aspect of it,
Right.
and then later on, carry on to the economic.
Yeah, what are the the political?
The political, implication
Right.
of that at the global level, especially vis-a-vis the West.
Exactly.
Yeah, Doctor.
Sessegnon or me?
Or Sessegnon, shall we start with you, and then we'll give you back the microphone. Sessegnon, what do you think is the implication vis-a-vis the West, and
Why are they so afraid?
Why the West is so afraid anyway?
Well, this reminds me the story of the slave and the master. When the slave looks for ways to free himself or to emancipate, it leaves a void in the master's environment, and that creates some sort of fright, from the part of the master. I think what we're looking at here, what we're witnessing here is a situation where the African countries have realized that there is a need for them to expand their partnership. There is a need for them to really profit from what they have as wealth, what they have as resources, because it has taken so long when Africans have always, seen their resources taken, in a raw form, without countries or these countries benefit from the real wealth that could really help to develop their countries. So the situation comes to the point where Africa is today looking for ways to develop. And the way to develop is to really expand African countries to expand their partnerships. And when we have countries such as France, for instance, as far as the Francophone countries or French-speaking countries are concerned, the colonial agreement prevents French-speaking countries to expand their partnership or to deal with different other countries except France. But when we realize today that in the context of BRICS, the opportunities are given to African countries to look elsewhere, away from their traditional partnerships or traditional colonial, agreements, it becomes frightening. So the question now is, what is it that these Western countries, in particular France, is going to get? Are they going to lose their supremacy? Are they going to lose their hegemony over these French-speaking countries? And when they do that, when they lose this supremacy or when they lose this hegemony, what is going to happen to their economies? What is going to happen to their positions within the Western powers? So this becomes threatening for them. But for us, Africa, this is an opportunity because we don't think that the Western country will ever allow Africa to develop. And if we really need to develop, we need to build relationship with the countries who can sit on the same table with us and discuss how we can build our partnership on a win-win basis. So this new group, these new emerging powers, becomes so powerful with the power that they have in terms of their in the population, in terms of their power, economic power, that ways and means will be put in place from the Western part to prevent the evolution of or the development of this new dynamic through the BRICS. So I think these are the different elements that really frighten the West.
Could I mention something else? I have a lot of discussions, of course, with colleagues and friends here in the United States. And what they are constantly asking me is then if the African countries are rebelling, which I think is a good thing, against their former imperial masters, France, England, and the United States to some extent, why are they choosing to ally in any way with other superpowers who might in turn dominate them? Those superpowers they mean are Russia and China. And it's a fair question that I always have to answer to my friends. For some reason, they are my friends, although they're very intelligent. They seem to think that the former French, England colonialists are still popular or are still desirable on the part of the Africans to stay there, to stay in their position of hegemony. So they're always saying, why would these African countries turn to ally themselves with other imperial powers? That's what we see as Russia and China.
Yeah, and then how can we be sure that we're not like these countries are not leaving a master to go to another master? Quickly, Sessegnon, and then we'll go to Gnaka for a more global perspective, because it smells like a non-aligned movement here.
Should be,
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I don't think that African countries are moving from one master to the other. History has taught us that Russia has always been on the side of Africa.
Yes.
And Russia has never colonized any African country. And Russia has always been on the side of African struggle. And that history has taught us that. And in terms of resources, we don't think that Russia will ever come and plow and exploit the resources in Africa. I think the reason why the Western powers are so frightened is because they count on the African resources for their development,
Right.
which is not the case of Russia. Russia has its own resources.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
China has
Exactly.
its own resources. And we've seen in different cases where even when China came in Africa, we've seen the extent of development that China has put in place in many African countries. We have seen bridges, we've seen shopping malls
Yeah.
that China has put in place in many African countries, which is not the case. We've seen France. When we take the case of Cote d'Ivoire, for instance, we've seen that a country like France is managing the water, the water supply, the electricity supply, and
Uranium.
many other major services. But those services become very, very expensive to the common citizen in Cote d'Ivoire. So history tells us that it is high time that Africa looks elsewhere. And we know that if Africa needs to develop, the West is not the right partner, because if Africa needs to transform its raw material into finished products, that will be the end of the Western power, because it is the transformation of the raw material that the West takes from Africa
Right.
that constitutes the basis of the Western development.
Very
So
good point.
this is for me the key points where Africa really needs to oppose, its strength, its power to the West in terms
Right.
of its main resources that constitutes the basis of the Western development.
Lagoke, Dr. Lagoke has the advantage of not being part of the organization. So we'll ask him a more global perspective on that. Gnaka, you are an historian. It's not the first time that countries are trying to drift away from, an alignment. We had the non-aligned, Dr. Lagoke. Is it again the new rise, or the rise of the global south? Is it a non-aligned movement? How do you define that BRIC dynamic in the global sphere, Dr. Lagoke?
Okay, I'm going to try. Sessegnon gave many beautiful answers, but I'm going to try and add a few things. The first thing is that when there was the Cold War, there was that conference in Bandung, 1955, which was the cornerstone of the non-alignment movement. Countries like China pushed that movement, Indonesia and India. Even if Indonesia did not get a chance to be a member of the BRICS now, but we have to know that India played a major role during that non-alignment movement. For many observers like me, we see the BRICS as the economic expression, this geopolitical expression of that non-alignment movement. That's the first thing. Even though China now or Russia are still very important powers, the same way yesterday they were supporting the non-alignment movement somehow. That is the first element. The second one, the Europeans, of course, they're afraid. Remember, for the last 500 or 600 years, the Black people and people non-white and went through several systems of exploitation, slavery. It started from the doctrine of discovery with the papal bulls, later on the slave codes, the black codes, the Jim Crow laws, and later on, the code of the indigenous for the people who were colonized. So, and then we've seen slavery, colonialism, apartheid, Jim Crow, and everything that you can imagine. For hundreds of years, those who were the victims of those systems somehow may have gained some kind of freedoms, but they have not conquered the economic freedom. So that's why Sessegnon is saying that the Africans have to look elsewhere. African countries tried with the same European traditional powers, France, England, Spain, Portugal, even the United States, and then Africa represents less than 2% of the world economy. That's another fact. The third element, with the rise of the BRICS, this is a sentence that I have coined, African countries, or the countries of the global south, they have the power of choice that they did not have for the last 70 years since the creation of the institution of Bretton Woods. We know the series of agreements, economic agreements or commercial agreements signed by the Western institutions and the Western countries with the former colonies. And then many of those countries, particularly the Francophone countries, they are far from being developed nations. And then as we see all those elements, today we understand why the Europeans are afraid. Sessegnon spoke about it. It is about the preferential treatment that the French enjoys with its former colonies. That is going to be the same thing if Saudi Arabia or the Emirates, United Arab members, they were two strong allies of the United States who decided to join the BRICS. Then, of course, when it comes to the exploitation, the commercialization of oil and gas with Russia, then you can imagine that there will be that preferential agreement between the U.S. allies within the BRICS with Russia. And this is going to give more power to the BRICS nation. And that's why we see what is happening.
Okay, I think that also people from the United States, if they're educated about this, see BRICS more possibly as a military alliance. That's not the case, correct? I mean, right, go ahead.
Because one thing, the BRICS, everyone knows that the ultimate goal of the BRICS is to somehow put an end to the hegemony of the Western world.
Exactly.
So we know that.
Right.
It
seems to me that's a threat.
Yeah, that's already a threat, but it means also that they're going to build a multiple dimensional alliance. They're going to have multiple alliances among themselves. So it can be commercial, it can be economic, it's going to be political, geopolitical, international affairs, and it's going also to be military. And people have to know that. Okay. And that's why, based on some of the reports that I read, that's why Indonesia somehow was not too excited in the last minute to join the BRICS because they don't want to antagonize the United States because they're not ready to drop the dollar, while leaders like Lula said that he did not understand why many countries in the world, they continue trading with the dollar while they have the opportunity to trade with their own currencies. So this is also an aspect of the conversation.
So, folks, it's interesting that you have touched an important part of this discussion, the economics aspects of it. So we have a second video which is asking, is the IMF, because Dr. Gnaka Lagoke, you talked about the International Monetary Fund and the Bretton Woods institutions, is the IMF going to be replaced by the Bank of the BRICS? Right. So we have a little video that will give us a little bit of context, and then we come back to continue on that.
Sound.
BRICS group of countries exists not only to strengthen government-to-government relations, but also to forge stronger ties.
A segunda coisa que eu acho que o Banco dos BRICS tem que ser mais eficaz e mais generoso do que o FMI. Ou seja, o banco ele existe para ajudar a salvar países e não para ajudar a afundar países. Porque é o que o FMI faz muitas vezes.
All right, so can the BRICS new development bank replace the IMF?
The dollar.
And the dollar. This is the main question, because beside the military might of the BRICS, there is also the economic might. So, Sessegnon,
Yes.
do you think that, and then was it also a part of the discussions in South Africa recently? Are the BRICS going to go ahead with the replacing the dollar as
And the IMF?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's not about replacing one institution with another one. I think it's about finding alternatives. We know, for instance, the terms and conditions of the International Monetary Fund and other institutions, other traditional institutions, which sometimes are very stringent, very difficult to meet. And for some of our African countries, it becomes almost like a chain when our governments go to those banks, those institutions to borrow. So what we're trying to do here with the new development bank, with the BRICS Bank, is to give some alternatives to African countries or to BRICS member countries. These alternatives are to see what is it that can make it much easier for these countries, for our countries to have access to loans, to have access to funding without chaining themselves with the high rates of interest. So the BRICS Bank does not come in to replace your IMF or your traditional funding systems. It is an alternative that is just coming to open up or to give more opportunities to these emerging economies. And I was sitting with the CEO of the BRICS Bank in South Africa, with the representative of the BRICS Alliance in West and Central Africa, and we spoke about the opportunities that the BRICS countries have, or even the non-BRICS African countries have, in terms of accessing funding from the BRICS Bank. And if we were to do a slight comparison, you will see that the terms and conditions that the BRICS Bank offer compared to those that the IMF and your traditional funding institutions offer, there's quite a huge difference, in terms of, what is it that one country has to do to have access to those funding. So there is really, it's not about replacing one institution by the other, but it is about giving more opportunities, because any institution, these are banking institutions, they can work side by side. But who gives more opportunity? I think that's more what it is about. For instance, non-member countries, non-BRICS member countries can go to the BRICS Bank and borrow. But that non-member country would have to be endorsed by a member country. For instance, if Cote d'Ivoire a non-member country wants to borrow from BRICS Bank, depending on the type of project that is that's the funding is sought for, South Africa would have to endorse Cote d'Ivoire, which in the endorsement will for instance, take into consideration the expertise that will come from South Africa to go to Cote d'Ivoire and implement the project. So indirectly, because of the expertise coming from South Africa, South Africa will benefit indirectly from that project. In that particular case, the non-member country can get the loan from the funding from the BRICS Bank. So I think for us, this institution is not coming to fight any other institution, but it's coming to give more opportunities
Okay.
Okay, I have a question.
for African countries to really undertake their own development that
Right.
has been lacking all along.
I think that is a fair statement. However, I think that at least here in the United States, that's viewed as competition, right?
Yeah, it's
Went
viewed as
through-
competition and also, but I understand why some countries have decided to leave, to seek other ways of,
Yeah.
getting funds because remember, the International Monetary Fund, put a lot of countries in the global south in a dire strait,
Exactly, exactly.
through what they call the structural adjustments. And then, Argentina, for example,
Right.
have had a lot of trouble with
Exactly,
the International
exactly,
Monetary
right.
Fund. And I'm pretty sure that's why Argentina is so interested in getting into this alliance of the BRICS.
Mm-hmm.
So, Gnaka Lagoke, are you still with us?
Yeah, of course
Yes.
I'm here.
Okay. So while I think both, I don't know what you'd say, Gnaka, but your colleague there was saying that this is more or less could be cooperative. What I'm saying as a person from the United States is that that is not the way the elites in this country are viewing this. They are viewing it as a threat. And they, I think, view it as a threat primarily from Russia and China. And I'm just I'm just commenting on that. I don't expect any particular, it's not a question exactly, but I think that's fair to say, isn't it? And right now, the United States is, in my view, in a proxy war against Russia in the first place. And so, in other words, I'm asking you the question, could this increase tensions between the United States, France, England, and frankly, the white powers of the world and the black and brown ones?
Yeah, of course there will be tension because when you understand the rationale of white supremacy, you don't share power. So now that the West is going to be obliged to share power, of course, it's going to be seen as another expression of war. It's going to be seen as an expression of competition. But even though the African countries think that they're not going to war, I just gave you the example of Indonesia, which in the last minute somehow thought that it was not ready enough to join the BRICS because Indonesia did not want to antagonize the West. That's one element. But what Sessegnon was saying, it is what I call the power of choice. It's not like African countries or the countries of the global south. They're not going to need the IMF. If they want to go there, they can. But the IMF or the World Bank, now they know that they are not the only one on the market, and that the power of choice that the global south is going to have gives them a leverage to have better negotiation with the Western institutions. This is how I see it.
Tried to invite himself to the summit. How
Did he go?
He was refused the access.
Wow.
And of course Putin wouldn't accept
No,
accept that
Putin did accept.
that
Macron, you mean.
Macron
Right,
be
right,
there.
right,
No,
right, right.
so
Not just Putin. He's not a member of the BRICS, and he wanted to be there. It did not make sense. So
yeah,
Yeah.
Putin,
Yeah.
China,
Even as
Russia,
an
even
observer.
South Africa, no
not
one
even as
wanted
an
him there.
observer, because
No, for
and
what?
then so talking about these colonial powers that are lurking around,
Yeah,
the
more
BRICS.
than lurking.
So could we? How do you put the rise of the BRICS with the instability? I mean, quote unquote instability in the Sahel region in Africa, where it seems that we are witnessing a new wave of decolonization or colonization and decolonization. How do you put that in this context of these new movements in Africa? You, and then we'll get to Sessegnon later. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, yeah. So we are at a very important juncture in the history of the world, and particularly for Africa, because of the crisis in the Sahel region. We're seeing the rise or the revival of the Pan-African consciousness, and that led to the rise to power of a number of officers in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Guinea, and then today in Niger.
In Gabon, even
Gabon,
Gabon just
aujourd'hui.
joined, but that's
No,
not
no,
West Africa.
no.
That's not,
No.
that's not the Sahel region. Okay.
Come in. You say Sahel, but I can add Gabon. But even though the coup in Gabon seemed to have its particularities,
Yes.
but still it's the military coup, and that ended, the regime or the rule of Bongo, Ali Bongo.
Congo too.
Yeah, Bongo the second. So now, with Mali being the leader of the vanguard country in that expression of the Pan-African consciousness, which has some traditional ties with Russia, that we can see that there is the growing influence of a Russian, like a BRICS country, Russia, in the region. That's also one of the reasons why many countries in the West, the United States and France, that are a little bit, they feel threatened, because when you watch the news, the French media, it is unbelievable how those Europeans are literally crying because they're losing the influence in the region to the Russians. So yes, the words, we have not used the words here. I'm going to use them. BRICS is contributing to the construction or to the building of a polycentric world, of a multipolar world. It is not just about America and then Russia, or America and China. It should be about America, Russia, China, India, Brazil, Ethiopia, and we want to see when there is a multipolar world or a polycentric world, countries that are claiming to gain their sovereignty, they have the leverage to negotiate with whomever that can meet their needs. And this is how those African countries are engaged in what we call the struggle for the economic freedom of Africa. And it is like the second independence of the African countries in the Francophone world. And this also is in line with one of the objectives of the BRICS, which is about sovereignty, building a multipolar world.
You talk about sovereignties. Some critics are saying that it's a patchwork of dictatorships, and then so are we going to the past years, or the past decades, the international community has tried to come up, or have come up with the idea of interventions in some countries on behalf. Are we just going to see that gone and have like any country, I have to play the devil's advocate, yeah? Have any country, be on their own, do whatever they want,
yes,
and just for the sake of saving their sovereignties?
I don't know if I get the question, but when the West is talking about democracy, we know that they're not sincere, they're not serious about it.
Right.
When they wanted to go against Ukraine, they overthrow Yanukovych in Ukraine, and they put Zelensky there, and then we see the results. They can present him as one of the greatest Democrats. Zelensky is not better than Putin when it comes to governance. If people want to talk about democratic rights of individuals in this society. And then they destroyed Libya, like he said, and they went to Ivory Coast and they bombed Gbagbo, and then they bombed the civilians in Ivory Coast, and in the name of democracy. Now, guess what? So today we saw that Bongo was accused of doing some fraudulent activities, that he did fraud on the elections. He was replaced by military, by an officer. So we were hoping to see France doing the same thing that they did in Ivory Coast. But the leader of the opposition, it looks like he won the election, but the French are not supporting him to be in power, like a lukewarm denunciation of the coup d'etat in Gabon, and then that's it. The same French who want to go and do a war, or who want the ECOWAS to do a war on their behalf, the French, we don't see them thinking about the same thing about Gabon. So it is not about democracy anymore. And people like me, we believed in democracy. And there are many like that. I think that the time has come for every country of the world to choose the system of governance that he wants to advance his interests. So this is where we are today. And then the model, the so-called European democratic model, but it is even sometimes I don't want to talk like this. There are many good things, but the foundation were not that great. You know, the United States here, how for more than 100 of years in America, it was more about the power of the white male. Yeah. And women started voting in the 20th century. So, and then it is when they secured the destruction of the rights of black people, of Indians, of the white male, then later on they open up, and people are talking about the American democracy as if from the beginning it was that, I mean, it did not have an original sin. Same thing with the Europeans. So today, when you talk about democracy, the same European will come, they will use one individual who is going to serve and meet their interests. That's why they talk about Bazoum, who is a pro-West. But the same thing, they will not do that if somebody comes to power like Assimi Goïta in Mali, who want to serve the interests of his country and who want to diversify the partners of Mali, and who is starting with Russia, then he becomes a threat, then he becomes a dictator. So we're tired of narrative. It does not work anymore. It means people in Africa.
Thank you.
Sessegnon, your take on this question
is not much time left.
Yeah. Is it about choosing one side and being
or not aligned,
or not aligned? Is it about I do whatever I want and what do you think going to the BRICS means for democracy in Africa and the rule of law?
Well, I think Dr. Gnaka said most of it. First of all, my apologies. I just got power outage, which affects a little bit the lighting in where I am.
No problem. We can see you very well. So continue.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you as well. Yeah.
All right. I think the problem, Dr. Gnaka touched it, is the question of sovereignty. Our African countries have signed, defense agreements that has weakened our national armies, our national, defense force, and which has given so much power to these foreign militaries to come and set the rules in our own country, and which automatically, give them power to intervene anytime when they feel that their interests are threatened. But this has also led to the economic, situation that our countries are going through, because we were not able, or we are not able to manage our own raw materials. And when we do so, when an African leader does or try to pose some sort of resistance to this domination, these bases, these army bases, Western army bases in those countries intervene and take that particular leader out of power.
Right.
The
Yeah, we saw
examples
that. Yeah.
are so many,
Right.
and the examples are all over Africa. The most recent one that you and I know is what happened in Cote d'Ivoire, what happened in Libya. So I think
Libya in particular.
as long as the, the African countries cannot manage their own defense, cannot manage their own resources, cannot manage their own destiny, will always think that the Western powers will always think that they need to export or to import their democracy or their system of governance into Africa, which is not right, which is not true. Because in terms of governance, in terms of democracy, as one of the African leaders said, that our social, structures are such that the only way we can really manage our societies is through democracy. So
Right.
the idea of bringing democracy into Africa is the same idea that the same Western powers used in the colonial time when they thought that Africa needed religion,
Missionary.
Africa needed to be civilized. So we are used to this now, and this is the reason why we need to strengthen the BRICS organization for Africans to fight really for their true sovereignty.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Sandy.
I was just going to say that, in this country, there's a similar movement. There's a similar movement of putting the interest of the people of the United States over the global economy. There is that movement asking what is in the interest of our country. Certainly, in my view, as an American, it is not to sponsor imperial wars all over the world or to rob other people of the world of their resources. It's to help people develop, but it's also to let them manage their own affairs. And frankly, I think that's a goal that should be here as well. In this country, we should be able to manage our own affairs free of the elites who make all these decisions here for us, which harm the United States, but also the rest of the world. I want to mention, though, one other thing before we close, because we're running out of time. We were joined, at least in the beginning, with Robin Lloyd of Toward Freedom, and that is an organization and a journal that has always been the voice of the non-aligned world. So I'm thanking her for her participation as well. And Eric, I just want to...
Yeah, I thank our two guests and
Yes, and our two guests.
But I have also a mission to. I have to send the African, public,
People,
the
yeah.
African people to a mission, which is, how can we also make sure that our countries,
Yeah.
whatever resources we have, we can, share among ourselves. One thing is probably to make the Western powers the reason for all the problems in Africa, but most of our elites in Africa, most of them are exploiting their own country. How can we see that change? Maybe that's the final word. Conclusions. How can Africa? Yeah.
Do I go, Sessegnon?
Yeah, we'll start with you and then we end up with Sessegnon. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I wanted to I prepared my conclusion. So your questions seem to be in line with what I wanted to say. So yes, we are excited about the BRICS, but I have a different approach about the BRICS, and then this is going to somehow be in my conclusion. So I think that if the BRICS really want to bring something new on the face of Earth, that there are three pillars. The first one, here it has to be the adoption of humanistic value systems. And I'm going to mention them. That's the first element. The second one, it has to be about the decolonization of the economy, of the international economic system, which should precede the de-dollarization. Number three, it has to be about integration, the BRICS, should help African countries to foster a stronger and a better economic integration. Going back to the first element, we see that the Western world is based on capitalism and neoliberalism. But when you take South Africa, we have the Ubuntu philosophy, which is about humanness. Brazil, under Lula, produced a concept which is about helping the poor, Bolsa Familia. India has Satyagraha, which means hold fast to the truth that Gandhi used to organize the struggle, which is also about the importance of the community. The Russians have the same system which is called Me, which is about a nation, village, and the world and the community. And then we have all the systems, and then we have also the same concept within the Muslim communities, which is called Ummah, which is about community. So by putting emphasis on those value systems, we can elevate some values in the society: integrity, compassion. This is how we can see, people can neutralize those members of the elite in Africa or in the Western world who have joined forces in order to exploit Africans to the detriment of the Africa.
Thank you, Dr. Gnaka. We just have 1 minute left,
right.
And then we'll have Sessegnon, who has been very nice to be to join us from South Africa. Sessegnon, your conclusion?
Well, I think the BRICS organization need to be strengthened, and we need to come to the ends of challenges that are your military, your economic, your financial, your domination, and the BRICS alliance should be strengthened so that we end all these different type of dominations. And the interesting part of the BRICS is the BRICS alliance. The BRICS alliance is a lobby group for the BRICS the BRICS organizations. So what we do is to lobby, to explain to the objectives of BRICS to the non-member countries so that they see the good opportunity that this organization offers to Africa. So I think when we really work toward the strengthening of these organizations, African countries will see the path through development, where their resources will be used for their citizens, where their resources will be used for the true development of each every
Africa first as much as American first.
America first, Africa first.
Okay,
right.
to be continued.
To be
Sandy.
continued. Thank you very much, our guests. Thank you for Robin Lloyd, who joined us. And thank you for CCTV. And we are here on behalf of also the Voice of Vermont. And Eric and I are hopefully big voices. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks.